This is an LA Times Studios podcast.
California is known for its rich resources. It's what brought settlers to its valleys to grow year-round crops, land surveyors to its hills to drill for oil, and miners to its rivers to pan for gold. In more recent years, the state has sought to capture another of its natural resources, offshore wind. Power companies first began exploring the idea of harnessing wind off the coast of Humboldt County in 2018. The area received year-round steady winds, which made it an ideal location to erect turbines in the Pacific's deep waters. Then in 2021, the Biden administration opened the door to that development. It was a huge energy win for the state. California set a target of harnessing 25 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2045. That's the year the state is aiming to hit economy-wide carbon neutrality. But forward momentum on offshore wind has all but stopped under the Trump administration. Thanks to Trump's art of the deal, in the past year, the White House has offered $4 billion to offshore wind developers across the country to scrap at least a dozen offshore wind leases. Trump previously said he was energy agnostic, that he preferred an all-of-the-above energy strategy, which didn't cancel out fossil fuels. But Trump's moves are painting a different picture, where wind and clean energy investments are now being targeted and gutted. And that's leaving states like California, who are betting on the clean electricity from those projects, in the lurch. From LA Times Studios, this is Boiling Point. I'm your host, Miranda Green.
During one of the most severe windstorms Southern California experienced in more than a decade, the Palisades and Eaton fires ignited, leaving heartbreaking losses in our communities. Now, as we build back, we're building stronger, cleaner, and more resilient in communities most vulnerable to dangerous weather conditions and wildfires. Southern California Edison is placing power lines underground, hardening the electric system by installing wires with protective coating, and adding advanced technology to help keep communities safe. The work is underway as communities rebuild across the region. And if you were impacted by the Eaton fire, support may be available through Southern California Edison's Wildfire Recovery Compensation Program. Claims can be filed directly through the program. No legal fees, no lengthy litigation, payment in months, not years. To file or explore the program, visit sce.com/directclaims. Communications funded by ratepayers.
Everyone is selling you a better way to live. A morning routine, a blood test, a serum, a supplement, a reason your face looks tired. Some of it's real, some of it's marketing with better lighting. This season on Live and Well, I'm talking to the people who actually know the difference. Doctors, founders, experts, and culture shapers with something sharper to say about skin, health, aging, beauty, fitness, food, and the way we're all trying to feel a little better in our bodies. I'm Melissa Magsaysay. Listen to Live and Well from LA Times Studios wherever you get your podcasts.
I think increasingly over the last 10 to 15 years, institutional capital and other, capital sources have kind of looked at this and recognized this is a pretty attractive investment property.
For the longest time, sports was viewed as a passion and not a business, but they are a great business.
AI is doing some disfragmentation. We're seeing the same thing in the media world, except for in sports.
This is What Matters Now with DLA Piper. In this episode, DLA's Richard Rubano and Ranesh Ramanathan are joined by Vishal Gandhi, Managing Director at Ares, to break down the opportunities and constraints and explore what private equity's growing presence means for the future of sports as both a business and a cultural institution. To hear a portion of their conversation, stay tuned at the end of this episode.
I'm speaking with Hayley Smith, an LA Times climate reporter who's been following this offshore wind war between the Trump administration and California leaders. Hi, Hayley. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
So Offshore wind was at one time seen as a climate solution for California. The turbines were planned to be built in various areas up and down the coast. But in the past year, these plans to construct the majority of these towering turbines have been halted. What's responsible for this 180 that we're currently experiencing?
The main answer to your question is politics. There are other factors as well, technical challenges that we can get into. But yeah, as you mentioned, California has a goal of 25 gigawatts of offshore wind power by 2045, which would actually be enough to power about 25 million homes and would entail something like 1,600 turbines as tall as the Eiffel Tower floating in federal waters about 30 miles off the shore. We had I use the past tense now. We had 5 lease areas in the state, 2 off of Humboldt Bay near Eureka, and 3 off of Morro Bay along the Central Coast. But in the last few months, the Trump administration has struck a series of deals with offshore wind leaseholders to walk away from their projects and instead invest in fossil fuel projects in the United States. So our 5 leases have now been whittled down to 2, and frankly, those last 2 are hanging by a thread.
You have been covering offshore wind for quite some time. What has California's relationship with wind power looked like? How did the state start embracing the idea of constructing offshore wind?
Offshore wind has been seen as an important component of energy portfolio for the state. We've got this goal of total 100% decarbonization by 2045. So to get there, the state has to invest in an array of renewable energy sources. Solar has really exploded in the state, and battery energy storage as well. But those run into the issue of they don't work that well overnight, and they don't work that well on overcast days and in the winter when the days are shorter. So wind has always been seen as this kind of great companion piece to solar because wind blows overnight. It often blows 24 hours a day, or at least pretty steadily. And so back in 2022 is when the state set this ambitious goal of 25 gigawatts of wind power by 2045. And those 5 leases that I just mentioned were awarded under the Biden administration.
So offshore wind is a big component of hitting those goals. Now that we're seeing the Trump administration intervene and get some of these offshore wind developers to essentially pull out of some of these projects, where is that leaving us in terms of the commitment to hitting those metrics by 2045?
It's absolutely a challenge. Offshore wind is something that depends on a relationship between the state and the federal government, right? There's a lot of work that we need to do here within our jurisdiction on the land side. That's preparing the ports to assemble the turbines and tow them out to sea. It's preparing substations and transmission lines to be able to take the power from the turbines and connect them to our main grid. But none of that can be done without the support of the federal government because offshore wind leases are in federal waters. They are 30 miles or so off the coast. And so, unfortunately, it's had a huge effect on the state's plans. The thinking originally was that offshore wind could be something like 10 to 15% of the state's energy portfolio. And this whole political fight has really put a lot of that in jeopardy.
I know that when these projects are first proposed, you get a lot of local pushback too. People don't necessarily like change, and offshore wind, you will see those turbines on your coast, quite similarly to how we see, oil rigs off the coast, but instead it would be wind. I'm assuming in California, there was some hesitancy from locals and people that have been opposed to this, but I also imagine that over time, there have been many communities that have come to embrace the idea of having offshore wind and clean energy. Where did we currently stand with this kind of push and pull before the Trump administration intervened?
It's an interesting question because I actually spent some time in Eureka reporting a story about the wind project up there in Humboldt Bay. And the community is still split on this. I mean, there are economic benefits and jobs and things of that nature that I think some people are excited about. But also, it is a sort of permanent change to this area. The turbines there would take about 10 years. They would be building one or two of them a week. So imagine every single week you're seeing an Eiffel Tower get built in your backyard and then towed out to sea. And then the next week they do it again and again. And there's concerns about the threat to aquaculture, to the fisheries and the industries up there as well. So I think there's still some division about it. And it's sort of one of these classic green versus green stories where it's like, we know that this is for the good of the environment. This is going to eliminate climate warming fossil fuel emissions and help combat climate change, but it has to go somewhere, and someone's having to sort of make the sacrifice of their neighborhood or their backyard in order for the greater good.
And so we had 5 leases that you said were up and down the coast, mostly in Humboldt and Morro Bay. I'm assuming it's because those areas had a lot of wind.
That's exactly right. That's where some of the strongest offshore wind resources are in the state. There's 2 areas that have been identified for the build out of the wind terminals. One is in Humboldt Harbor near Eureka. The other is actually the port of Long Beach here in LA. So those 2 ports were identified as having kind of the necessary criteria, which is deep waters, a bit of a protected cove where they could assemble the turbines, and then, a wide enough exit to tow them out to sea. And so the turbines in the Morro Bay area would actually be towed up from the port of Long Beach and Los Angeles. And so, yeah, but there's not a lot of places in the state that are good for this. So that's what makes these federal challenges all that much more difficult, because it's not like we can say, oh, okay, we'll just try somewhere else.
How far along were we in the process of getting these wind turbines constructed and up and running? What were kind of the estimates in terms of when we would potentially see one of these offshore wind developments actually get going?
So the answer to your question is we were not close. And this is for a number of reasons. Offshore wind along the east coast of the United States and in most parts of the world, the turbines are attached to the seafloor. It's called fixed offshore wind. California has a unique set of engineering challenges in that the Pacific waters off the coast here get incredibly deep incredibly quickly. So our turbines would not be able to be attached to the seafloor. They would have to be floating. There are some places in the world where floating offshore wind is up and running, particularly some parts of the North Sea, but it's never been done at this scale, and it's never been done in water this deep. Some parts of the California lease areas are like 4,000 feet deep. So this is a whole new set of engineering challenges. They've got to find ways to build the floating platforms. They still have to be tethered to the seafloor, so there's some kind of long cable that's kind of floating in the water column, has to be slack enough to withstand ocean currents, and then they need cables to transmit the electricity back to shore. So we are a very long way still from getting any turbines up and floating in the water. Most likely we're talking 2030s, mid-2030s at this point.
You just painted a pretty complicated picture of how to get this kind of new technology up and running. But at the same time, it sounded like there were several companies that were committed to making this work and to take this on. Why was that?
Well, it's promising. And I think that these companies also saw that the state was really committed to this. We had set aside funding from our 2024 climate bond to support offshore wind development efforts. We've got both projects funded or well supported at the ports, although the Humboldt project did lose $500 million in federal funding from the Trump administration, so they're looking elsewhere now. But the state has really been behind this. And so I think that for the companies, and again, remember, these leases were signed during the Biden administration, so it was also a very different federal picture at the time that these agreements were made. And a lot has changed in the last few years.
I want to ask you about that federal funding, because I think that's an important component of this.
Well, unfortunately, clean energy, renewable energy, green energy, whatever term you want to use, has been heavily politicized by this administration. President Trump has described wind in particular as expensive, unsightly, unreliable. But even broadly, clean energy projects have been really targeted as woke or some kind of climate scam, climate hoax, green new scam sort of language. It's important to keep in mind that the president did receive a lot of funding from fossil fuel companies during his presidential campaign. He has focused very heavily on a drill, baby, drill agenda that he describes as sort of unleashing American energy dominance, which is really heavily based on oil, gas, and coal. And so this is part of a larger agenda.
I think that what you just said seems to be the reality that we're facing here. We have an administration that really is favoring fossil fuels, and it's not being subtle about that. And we're seeing that happen here with this offshore wind debate. And I think it goes back even farther, one could say. Donald Trump, before he was president, has always been opposed to offshore wind and wind in general.
Mhm.
And it actually goes back to some of his early days when he owned a golf course in Scotland. And there was a proposed wind farm off the coast of his golf course. He has really pushed back against wind. And a lot of his administrative officials have kind of fallen in line. I remember former Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke oftentimes said that that wind in general was a horrible idea because it killed birds.
Mhm.
And that's been a major talking point. Of course, we've heard pushback on the East Coast that offshore wind also is leading to right whale deaths, which are a threatened species of whales that are off the East Coast. Some people have said that is caused by offshore wind. Scientists say that it's more likely due to fishing and sea vessel strikes. But, it's become a really political topic in a way that offshore drilling does not get politicized.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we can absolutely raise those questions and we should do the studies on birds and whales, but also let's not forget, how many animal and human deaths have been caused by climate change, which is driven by fossil fuel. It's a little bit of a disingenuous argument, I think. But again, that goes back to what we were talking about before. There's always going to be trade-offs. And I'm glad you mentioned the Scotland golf course because it does seem like wind in particular feels very personal for this president.
And we actually just recently learned some very interesting details about the federal funding and why that was specifically stripped from California. Talk to me about the loss of those funds that I think ostensibly came from the Biden administration under his capstone law. Why did the state lose so much funding for clean energy projects?
We've been covering this move by the Energy Department to cancel about $8 billion in federal funding for clean energy projects that were in various stages of development. And all of these grants were canceled in 15 states, including California, that did not vote for President Trump in the 2024 elections. So the Energy Department has been challenged on that, saying, hey, these grant terminations specifically target blue states. They have denied this, although subsequently their lawyers did acknowledge that these grant terminations were politically motivated in court documents. And so this is something that's playing out in court as well. But again, it goes down to the sort of politicization of clean energy projects in the United States and particularly in blue states.
So Donald Trump hasn't made it a secret that he is not a fan of offshore wind. But at what point did we get an inkling that him and his administration were going to get involved in these projects in the way that they have?
The steps that this administration has taken around wind are unprecedented. In a sea of unprecedented actions, these really stand out to me. So the first deal was announced back in March, where the Trump administration, the Department of the Interior specifically, said that it had struck a $1 billion agreement with this French company, Total Energy, to walk away from their offshore wind leases off the coast of North Carolina and New York. And in exchange, Total Energy was going to take the $1 billion and invest instead in fossil fuel projects. This sent such a shockwave, not just through the offshore wind community, but even through the legal community of like, how can this administration essentially use taxpayer dollars to pay off these companies to walk away from projects that the states and their residents were invested in? So everyone was like really blown away when they did this. And now in the months since then, they've done it several more times. And so in total, the administration has paid out nearly $4 billion for the cancellation of at least a dozen federal wind leases, including the 3 off of California that we've mentioned. It was 2 of the Morro Bay leases and 1 of the Humboldt Bay. And all of the companies have agreed instead to invest in fossil fuel projects. So those, for example, include liquefied natural gas projects. There's a big LNG terminal that they're constructing in Louisiana that these companies are now going to be paying into, gas turbines, all sorts of things along these lines. So it's a really shocking turn of events. And again, it raises a lot of legal questions that are going to be playing out in courts over the next several months.
So the Trump administration is negotiating with these different offshore wind companies to get them to essentially abandon their plans and paying them billions of dollars to do so. And instead, it wants them to invest in fossil fuels. What is the logic for why you would pay a company to stop creating one type of energy to instead create a different type of energy?
I would be interested to see the inside of the president's head to understand the thinking here, because the logic is perplexing to me. You know, they're pushing this as part of their Make America Great, Unleash American Energy Dominance agenda. But we are seeing other countries, specifically China, invest heavily in offshore wind and solar. You know, China accounted for about half of the world's offshore wind additions in recent years. I think they're already nearing 50 gigawatts of deployment. And so I know that the president sees and recognizes China as a competitor. So from a strategic perspective, it is a little bit baffling to me why they would do this, other than what I mentioned before, which is that they have really strong connections to the fossil fuel industry and have received a lot of donations from them. This is also part of the Project 2025 agenda, which I know they've distanced themselves from, but they are executing very effectively. And so it is baffling to me, honestly, because if a Republican administration sees themselves as business forward, which has kind of long been a sort of characteristic of this party, just from a business perspective, this is confusing to me.
Yeah. And, it's interesting to me that several of these buyouts include promises that the companies will still invest their money elsewhere. But essentially what that's doing is it's taking that investment from states like Rhode Island and California, and it's moving it to red states. Mm-hmm. So the jobs are moving away from these coastal states to fossil fuel industry jobs. I imagine that has to have some sort of economic impact on these states too.
I think you bring up a really important point, because even though the administration is saying, look, we're still investing this money into energy projects, it's not a one-to-one exchange. An energy project leaving California and popping up instead in Louisiana or along the Gulf Coast doesn't really equal a fair trade. And so this is part of California's legal strategy. The state has issued a 60-day notice of intent to sue over one of the deals, the Golden State Wind deal. They'll probably file similar legal challenges against the other more recent deals as well. But this is their argument. This is having economic effects on the state. This is affecting jobs. They also argue it's a misuse of government funds and a failure to follow proper administrative procedures. I mean, there's a lot of technicalities to it. But at the end of the day, like you said, this has a ripple effect across the state and its plans and its residents.
And considering that we almost keep on seeing one of these negotiations happen weekly, what are your beliefs will happen to the remaining developers that are still committed to building these offshore wind projects in California?
I'm not optimistic. I wish I could say otherwise. 2 of our 5 are left at this point, and I'm sure they've been approached by the administration and are thinking about their options. Part of this has to do with the fact that any business like offshore wind, they're long-term investments, right? These companies, these projects are 10, 15 years to build out, and businesses like stability. And so from their perspective, if these projects are subject to the whims of whomever is in the White House, right? Okay, maybe we can say the next administration will love offshore wind and the projects are back on. But then what about the one after that? And it's notable, too, because the most recent deal in California was this German company, RWE. They made a $1.22 billion deal with the Trump administration to abandon its lease off of Humboldt, as well as 2 other leases off of New York and Louisiana. Now, RWE has a lot of offshore wind projects around the world. So it's not that they don't believe in wind at all. They do. They just don't see a path forward for it in the United States.
That seems to be a consistent thread that we're hearing and that I've noticed in my reporting as well. It is not that the world is moving towards fossil fuels. It's that the U.S. is. Mm-hmm. And this technology is still continuing abroad. As you mentioned, China is investing in it heavily. With gas prices rising, the U.S. has decided to double down on fossil fuels as a strategic national security initiative. But Europe, on the other hand, has argued that it's proof that they need to be investing more in clean energy and really moving away from fossil fuels because they can't control it. So this is a choice that we're seeing happening here, a very active choice. Have California officials had the chance to consider what they can do or what their next steps are?
So first, in terms of the state's response, I think that our strategy up till now has been we're going to focus on things within our jurisdiction. We're going to put our head down and wait out this administration and continue to do the port side, land side preparations that are needed for the eventual deployment of offshore wind in hopes that a more favorable administration comes along. So the state has been sort of slowly trudging forward with that work. The larger question of if wind doesn't happen and where are we going to get this energy otherwise is a big question. I think that nuclear is something that has recently come back into the conversation. Our last remaining nuclear power plant, Diablo Canyon, just got a life extension to 2030. There's a growing push to extend it again to 2045. Geothermal is another burgeoning source of energy right now, which basically taps into pockets of steam and heat that are rising from the center of the earth and uses that to spin turbines and generate electricity. Otherwise, I don't know. Natural gas would perhaps be the most likely way that we would make up for the loss of offshore wind, but that doesn't help us meet our 2045 clean energy targets. So that would, if anything, be a sort of stopgap while we figure out what comes next.
Hayley, thank you so much for chatting with me.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
California has been banking on its offshore wind projects to hit its climate targets and to bring in some much-needed electricity. And the Trump administration's abnormal, unilateral actions have left the state's leaders incensed and calling foul. After the break, I speak with California Congressman Jared Huffman about the legality of the deals and what it means for the state's offshore wind future.
Do you want the truth about the organic food on your plate? Then check out the Real Organic Podcast. It's the award-winning Best Sustainability, Environment, and Climate podcast, produced by the Real Organic Project and hosted by Dave Chapman and me, Lindley Dixon. Recently named one of the best climate podcasts by Earth.org, the Real Organic Podcast uncovers the forces reshaping organic food, like how corporate lobbying is redefining what organic means, and how industry use of new terms like regenerative are not even organic. Each episode features deep conversations with farmers, scientists, chefs, and journalists fighting to improve the food system. If you need a place to start, check out our recent episode with James Beard Award-winning author Nancy Matsumoto. From grass-fed dairy farmers to reviving regional grains, Nancy reveals the hidden work required to create transparent local food chains in stark contrast to big ag. So go ahead, follow the Real Organic Podcast wherever you get your podcasts.
Checked out your thermostat and your electric bill lately? Both are rising faster than we'd like, and students and teachers are feeling the heat too. While they sit in uncomfortable classrooms and breathe dirty air, California is sitting on nearly $200 million in funds set aside to upgrade aging school heating and cooling systems. By freeing hoarded school HVAC funds, students and teachers can get cooler, cleaner air, and by putting the interest on these funds to work, families can access cheaper and cleaner energy when temperatures climb instead of relying on the most expensive, dirty sources of power. Before leaving Sacramento, lawmakers must extend the California Schools Healthy Air Plumbing and Efficiency Program, or CalShape, and finally release funding for cooler, cleaner classrooms. At the same time, legislators must set aside the $70 million in interest earned to reduce electricity costs for families through the Demand-Side Grid Support Program. Learn more at edfaction.org. That's edfaction.org. Once again, edfaction.org. Paid for by Environmental Defense Action Fund.
Congressman Jared Huffman represents the 2nd District of California, which stretches from the Golden Gate Bridge to the Oregon border. He served in Congress since 2013 and currently holds the top position for Democrats on the House's Natural Resources Committee, which oversees energy development. Congressman, thanks so much for coming on the Boiling Point podcast.
My pleasure.
So I wanted to talk to you about offshore wind. German energy firm RWE is the latest developer to strike a deal with the Trump administration to stop its plans to build offshore wind in California. So far, the administration has offered nearly $4 billion to various developers to stop planned construction of these clean energy projects on both sides of the coast. And 3 of these projects that have been stopped were planned in California. What do you make of these deals?
It's outrageous. The president is, as he is known to do, just barreling ahead using the judgment fund, which is a specific fund to settle legitimate claims against the U.S. government, as a slush fund to just advance this insane war on clean energy. And to do it in a way that doesn't even settle real disputes. I mean, these are fake settlements, and it's obvious to me as a lawyer, as a congressman, that this is all a charade. But there's a lot of taxpayer money that is being lit on fire with this charade, and I think we're going to have to confront it.
Yeah, you've said the word slush fund, and you've said that this is a backwards use of taxpayer money. Can you tell me a little bit more about where this money is coming from to pay off these companies and why you believe it's illegal?
Yeah, the precedent is terrible to allow an administration, no administration would ever think to do this in the past, but to just circumvent Congress and do things like fake settlements with these offshore wind companies where he gives them billions of dollars to redirect their activities and investments down to Louisiana for an LNG export terminal. And that's what's going on here. Thankfully, there is some law out there. We still do have a rule of law. And as a lawyer, not just a congressman, I know that it has to be a legitimate claim. It has to be a legitimate settlement to access the settlement fund. So this will be contested. 7 states on the East Coast are already litigating against this. I'm rooting for them. I will be supporting and helping them in any way that I can. California is going to get in the game with its own litigation. I think that's pretty clear. Right now, I have some limited tools. I'm in the minority of Congress, but that could change pretty quickly. And I think I could have a much more robust set of tools to shine a bright light on this, expose it, and hopefully unwind it. It's just an absolute sham.
I think what's really interesting when you look at this collectively is that these offshore wind developments that are being settled are all on the coast of mostly blue states. And what the Trump administration is doing is promising that this money is going to instead go towards investment in different types of energy, which is not clean energy. As you mentioned, the liquid natural gas plant in Louisiana is one of the areas that is getting this reinvestment, and that's going to be exported. But that's a red state. What do you think as a representative of California about the promise that the Trump administration is giving, that there's still going to be the same amount of energy and it's still going to be jobs to the American people? They're just different. Is that an apples to apples comparison?
Well, there's not going to be anything close to the same jobs or the same amount of energy for U.S. consumers. This LNG export terminal in Louisiana is sending our natural gas abroad. which drives up energy prices for American consumers. And so that's the other paradox here. Not only is he taking from blue states, giving to red states, which he loves to do any chance he can get, but he's robbing consumers of one of the cheapest, most plentiful forms of energy and substituting investment in something that will drive up energy prices in the U.S. and, potentially even lead to more energy scarcity because U.S. consumers won't have that natural gas. Folks in Asia and Europe will be getting it.
One of the things that is also interesting to me is that in the first Trump administration, and this is Trump as well as other Republicans, they all said that they supported an quote unquote all of the above energy strategy, that it was we shouldn't really favor one type of energy over the other, but we want to make it fair for all energy types. It feels like this is different, right? He's buying out existing projects that were moving ahead with clean energy, and he's instead handing it to oil and gas companies or towards investment in fossil fuels. What do you think has changed?
Well, it's certainly not all of the above anymore. I was always skeptical of all of the above because, to me, if you're serious about the climate crisis, all of the above is tantamount to climate denial. I've always thought we should be smart about our energy investments and incentives and our policies, and prioritize the stuff we know we need to decarbonize. I look back nostalgically at the all of the above era now because at least there were Republicans who seemed to be fine. They didn't have a categorical opposition to solar and wind, and now they do. And our own Secretary of Interior, who implemented a whole bunch of wind projects when he was governor of North Dakota, used to talk about climate change, used to talk about clean energy, now sounds every bit as just ignorant and dogmatic on these things as Donald Trump or anyone else. So it's devastating. And I think the other thing that's changed is they're not only doing this as a giveaway to the fossil fuel industry, they're trying to do things that will have a permanent impact on clean energy. They don't just want to win in the near term. They want to destroy the offshore wind industry so that it can't come back. That's why they're buying out these leases. I mean, they could have just sat on the leases and not allowed the projects to go forward under the Trump administration. That wasn't good enough for them. They wanted to burn the bridge and buy them out. So this is unlike anything we've ever seen before. Certainly, I actually think when it comes to offshore wind, there's also just this very arbitrary Donald Trump element. He just hates offshore wind. And, a lot has been written about the fact that a project off the coast of one of his resorts in Scotland, really upset him personally. And you know how he is when he's got an axe to grind.
You are a member of Congress where Republicans are leading both the House and the Senate. You're the ranking member of the House Natural Resources Committee, which means you're the top Democrat. When you talk about these issues, how do your Republican colleagues on the committee view these deals with Trump? Are they supportive? Do you feel like they would be supportive if this was on the other foot and this was about fossil fuels being phased out and bought out?
Oh, they would go ballistic. In fact, they try to argue that is essentially what Biden was doing, but he wasn't. I mean, they point to the fact that Biden held very few lease sales for fossil fuels, that permitting slowed down, et cetera, that there was a moratorium on, coal and things like that on public land. None of that compares. I mean, they're actually, throughout the Biden presidency, we increased production of fossil fuels, certainly oil and gas, became the world's leading exporter, record profits, record exports. I mean, this was not a persecution of the fossil fuel industry, certainly not a very effective one, if that's what they think. What we see now against the clean energy industry is absolutely targeted. It is scorched earth. It is unlike anything we've seen before. My Republican colleagues, you ask, well, some of them will privately kind of roll their eyes and express some dismay at what is happening when we talk about issues like permitting reform, which, you could potentially have bipartisan consensus around some elements of permitting reform. I think they understand we can't even have a serious conversation about it while there's an open war on clean energy. It's absurd. between the Freedom Caucus and some real extreme MAGA Republicans in the Senate and the Trump administration, I see no sign of Donald Trump and others letting up. And to me, that means we're not going to be able to have a serious conversation about energy or permitting reform or much else in this space. We're just at an impasse.
I think one of the things that especially Californians take solace in is knowing that California is a climate leader and is trying to essentially assert itself as the antidote to what is happening with the Trump administration when it comes to clean energy. But so many of these issues, like offshore wind, still are reliant on the Trump administration's approval. As a member of Congress, what do you think is the future for clean energy in California on issues like this, when the administration is essentially dragging its heels and being so damaging?
It is remarkable to me when you think about everything Trump and his team have done to try to kill all wind and solar. The wind and solar is still around at all because it really has been a full spectrum attack to try to destroy these industries. And yet they have continued to advance with installed capacity and, breaking all kinds of records, including in places like Texas. So there's an incredible resilience that I think speaks to just the overwhelming economic and operational benefits of clean energy. It's just so compelling, and the speed with which it can be brought online. It's the only way we're going to meet, all of these new demands on the grid. But offshore wind is really vulnerable because of those federal permits, as you say. And that is where he's sort of got some unique advantages. And that was even before he started wielding the judgment fund like a slush fund. Yeah.
You have said in previous interviews that the administration pressured RWE into accepting the agreement. Have you spoken to any of these companies? Do they feel like they had the option to refuse the Trump administration's offer?
Yeah, I have spoken to them. I've had several of these CEOs in my office talking through exactly what happened. I don't want to put words in their mouth, but my sense is that Trump just put them through absolute hell, took them to the edge of financial ruin. I mean, they were out billions of dollars on these projects that they were counting on moving forward. Time is money when you're in business. They had shareholders and lenders and others that they have to account to. And so after squeezing them for, 18 months or so, he then dangled all of this money and this opportunity to walk away and, go do some natural gas investment. So they made a business decision. And, as they said in my office and explained it, they weren't happy about it, but they felt like they had no choice in terms of their fiduciary duty to shareholders, et cetera. So you're going to hear a lot of that when they explain it. They will also pretend that they had actual claims that they thought were being settled. That's a bunch of crap. I asked all these folks, did you ever write a demand letter? Did you ever give notice of breach of contract? Did you do any of the things that I know as a lawyer anyone does when there's a serious claim? Did you ever file a complaint? Did you have a draft complaint that you showed to them that you were going to file? None of this happened. And all of this is going to come out in the litigation by the northeastern states in California's lawsuit. This is a sham. It is a fake settlement. And I told them, you guys should not cash that check. Tell your investors, tell your shareholders that money's coming back to the U.S. Treasury.
So it sounds like you feel like there was some legitimacy in why they wanted stability. Businesses love a sure thing, but that they also almost rolled over really easily when they were offered this way out.
Yeah, I say shame on them. That is my view. Yeah, they were going to lose 4 years of time, and time is money in business. I get that. But to just totally walk away from all these stated commitments to clean energy and offshore wind and to California in the case of RWE, shame on them.
I think one thing of note about California's offshore wind proposals is that it was going to be a really innovative way of doing this. On the East Coast, they're locking wind platforms to the seafloor, but because the Pacific Ocean is so deep, California was looking at doing floating platforms, which have never really been done out in the Western Hemisphere. So there was a huge investment into something completely new that these businesses were willing to take the risk on. And so not only is this essentially limiting and handicapping how much clean energy will be coming into the state, but this kind of new technology no longer has an investment to know if it's even feasible.
Yeah, that's a great point. It has been done kind of at a limited scale in some places like Scotland and elsewhere. But we were going to be the first in the Western Hemisphere, certainly, to do it. And in California, you do floating offshore wind in places where the water's really deep, where you can't have fixed seabed platforms like they do on the East Coast. So this was going to be groundbreaking and would have given us an opportunity to really be global leaders in this space, because there will be more floating offshore wind around the world. And what we've done here is simply ceded that leadership to China, probably just China, but China perhaps and a few others who will continue ahead full speed.
There are still 2 offshore wind developments that are slated to be built in California. One is in Morro Bay and one is in Humboldt Bay. What do you think the future of those 2 projects are?
I hope those companies hang on. We will be there for them. As I've told all these companies, I will be your greatest ally if you do what you said you were going to do, if you deliver on this clean energy, because there's so many benefits to our climate goals, to the jobs. I mean, the one in Humboldt County, the 2 together, and the port redevelopment that was going to be part and parcel of that, would have created 5,000 jobs in a community that has really struggled to find economic progress for decades. It's a big deal. So I'm going to be allies with any company that wants to deliver projects like that are thoughtful, that are cited appropriately, and these were. But I'm going to be their worst enemy if they try to do a scam like some of them have just done with Donald Trump and the Judgment Fund. We're coming after him.
Well, speaking of worst enemy, you have promised that accountability is coming. What form will we see that in?
We're already seeing litigation. I believe that is going to lead to some accountability. You've seen letters that I and my colleagues in the U.S. Senate have written both to the Trump administration and to these companies, demanding information, putting them clearly on notice that we are going to contest these fake settlements. What else happens? Stay tuned. I think a lot could change if Democrats take back one or both houses of Congress. Then you've got even more firepower for that accountability.
Congressman, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been great speaking with you.
Thanks for having me.
Several states, including New Jersey, Rhode Island, and North Carolina, have been impacted by Trump's deals to halt offshore wind development in the United States, and many of them have sued over it. In June, 7 states sued the Interior Department, arguing that the deals will harm their states' economies, energy grids, and climate goals. California is expected to launch its own lawsuit soon. In late June, California Attorney General Rob Bonta and California Energy Commission Chair David Hochschild sent a notice of intent to sue to the administration and Golden State Wind, which was the first energy company to accept a buyout. They sent another notice of intent to sue in July, following Trump's second offshore wind settlement in California with energy developer Invenergy. Bonta wrote in one filing, "California won't stand idly by as the Trump administration illegally strikes deals to kill offshore wind projects and replace them with more windfalls for his fossil fuel friends. We're putting the administration on notice." If you like this show, please rate and subscribe. It really does help us and our team. And if you want to see more behind-the-scenes content or videos of our interviews, you can follow me on Instagram at Randy_Green or on YouTube at Miranda C. Green. Thank you for listening to Boiling Point. I'm your host, Miranda Green. My producers are Mary Knopf and Jonathan Shiflett of Studio Phonic. Additional production help from Audrey No. Sound design by Jonathan Shiflett. Monty Morin and Ingrid Lobet are our editors. Director of post-production is Patrick Stewart. Senior sound recording engineer is Nick Norton. Our podcast marketing manager is Bryn Jora. Our senior media manager is Kelsey Rodriguez. And our director of marketing operations is Nicole Adderholm. Special thanks to LA Times Studios president Anna Migzanian. President and Chief Operating Officer of the Los Angeles Times is Chris Argentieri. Executive Editor of the Los Angeles Times is Terry Tang. Boiling Point is executive produced and co-created by Darius Derrickson.
Welcome to the inaugural episode of What Matters Now with DLA Piper. Today we're discussing private equity's role in sports.
It's been interesting coming out of the depths of the pandemic. You've seen certainly a lot of these kind of recreational amateur sports have grown very, very significantly. And you've mentioned, several around pickleball and paddle, even golf, though, right?
Sure.
If you think about, the accessibility of golf and what it was 15, 20 years ago relative to the number of folks that were kind of new entrants into the sport during 2020, 21, when you couldn't really be with your friends and your family in an indoor environment. Golf was kind of that great opportunity to be outside and be able to be, still enjoy kind of outdoor activities. So you've seen massive amounts of participation, growth in the golf ecosystem, and both on the public side and then the private side as well, right? And that's created a pretty fascinating roll-up opportunity. So, I think you're going to continue to see that, and certainly saw that coming out of the depths of the pandemic.
I think it's kind of a particularly interesting trend because the world of AI and of kind of the virtual reality world, right, made it feel like you were moving into the direction of going to a stadium being a very friction-based experience and much easier viewing experience at home. And I think there was some concern for a bit of time that your top-end consumer might be willing to stay home and have a better in-home experience than stadium experience. But I think what we've seen in the market is that teams saw that trend. And to the points you guys are making, they started to develop fan-friendly locations around the stadiums themselves. So they really tried to keep you within the ecosystem, not just on game day, but to make the town a part of your experience.
Which is very interesting, right? Because you look at COVID effects on other community type events like the movie theater. Sporting events are totally different. People want to be there, right? The energy, the excitement, everything around it that attracts people back. So can I be the troublemaker now?
Let's do it.
Okay. What's the disruptor you're worried about, right? Because as we've talked about, it's almost cycle independent, right? It's not a cyclical business. It has a strong following customer base. It's got steady economics. What's your fear, Vishal, as you think about what could disrupt this?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's, as you look at the P&L for a lot of these assets, it's pretty simplified. So as you think about how some of these, team investments, for example, can get in trouble, obviously stagnation on the media rights side is, a very, very meaningful part of their revenue stream. So at the end of the day, there's obviously certain properties that have been relatively insulated from any type of headwinds. You see it with the NFL, with the NBA. You've seen really tremendous growth after every single renewal cycle. But at the end of the day, there's unlimited opportunities for fans to consume content today. And that wasn't necessarily the case 15, 20 years ago. So your ability to watch a second division Spanish soccer team is very, very easy and accessible at your fingertips. So what that's created, though, is a much more competitive broadcasting system. And as you think about one of the benefits of the revenue model, it's so recurring in nature, but obviously when you're deriving a significant portion of your revenues from media rights, obviously any type of headwind or stagnation could certainly, create a little bit of, flat growth.
Listen to What Matters Now with DLA Piper wherever you get your podcasts.